Welcome to Using Technology to Assess the 4 Macro Skills. The first part of this session will be devoted to a very brief introduction to some basic concepts of assessment, and later we will share some practical tips on how to use technology to assess listening, speaking, reading and writing in your lessons. Let's begin with a definition of the topic at hand. In education, the term assessment refers to the wide variety of methods or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, learning progress, skill acquisition, or educational needs of students. Let's highlight two things mentioned here. The definition makes reference to a wide variety of methods or tools and also to several types of evidence we need to gather during the process. This is important to consider to stop relying too heavily on written tests and oral lessons as the sole sources of learning evidence. And that's why the following distinction comes in handy. When we assess, are we doing an assessment of learning or for learning? This not so subtle distinction has to do with function and purpose, as Terry Haig puts it. A matter of who. Assessment of learning is a way to see what the students can do, while assessment for learning is a way to see what the teachers should do in response. For example, using student production as evidence of what was learned and achieved in terms of content, and then move on, is assessment of learning. Using that same evidence to inform instruction, plan new activities, design new strategies, and offer several instances of practice for students to advance at their individual paces, making learning more personal for each of them, is assessment for learning. It also has to do with what we expect from students. If it is just the mere reproduction of declarative knowledge, or the use and application of their knowledge and skills to diverse situations. In the first case, the focus is on the result or grade. In the second, we are more interested in the construction of knowledge, the solving of real-life problems, creation, research, etc. In order to switch the focus from assessing student knowledge to assessing student learning, assessment literacy is key. We need to know the tools available to reshift our assessment priorities and gather all the data we need during the teaching-learning cycle. The three main types in which we can break down assessment are diagnostic assessment, formative assessment, and summative assessment. This distinction has to do with the stages at which each of them can be used and also the purpose they serve, keeping in mind that this is not fixed and there is considerable overlap in the examples for each of them, as they can be used for multiple purposes, and it's all about the teacher's intention and what you seek to measure with the instrument of choice. So, what do we use each of them for? Diagnostic assessment is used to identify current knowledge and/or misconceptions about a topic. Some examples of diagnostic assessment are pre- and post-tests, self-assessments, entry and exit tickets, observations, polling, discussion board responses, and interviews. The examples marked with an asterisk involve authentic or performance assessment that focuses on construction and application rather than right or wrong answers. It's desirable to include this kind of assessment whenever possible during the teaching-learning process, because it mirrors real-life tasks or situations, so we can observe what students can do with the knowledge and skills they've acquired. Formative assessment is used to give educators in-process feedback so that instructional approaches, teaching materials, and academic support can be modified accordingly. Some examples are homework, Socratic discussions, peer reviews, think, pair, share, visual thinking strategies, reflection journals, sketchbooks, informal presentations, portfolios, ongoing, that is to say in process, project phases, submitted over time, and critiques. In recent times, There has been a continuous shift toward formative assessment because when it is frequently embedded into daily instruction, we gather information to check understanding, target intervention, review or evaluate instructional practices, and offer valuable and effective feedback to students. So, the most important aspect of formative assessment is not the data we collect, but what we actually do with it afterwards. Last but not least, we come to summative assessment. It is used to sum up learning at the end of the instructional process, as its name suggests. Some examples are high-stakes tests, teacher-created tests, multiple choice, checklists, portfolios, the culmination, performances, rubrics, essays, and capstone projects. As opposed to diagnostic and particularly formative assessments, summative assessment is usually graded. The relationship between formative and summative functions is complex because the pressure of examinations tends to obliterate the practices and processes of formative assessment, especially when it comes to the treatment of errors and grading. Formative assessment views error as an opportunity for growth and improvement, while in summative assessment it is usually translated into the deduction of points, and it means failure. Grading is of a definitive nature. After receiving their marks, students will probably pay little or no attention to feedback, because grades carry a finality which is too difficult to overcome in students' minds. So, ideally, we should include formative instruments for the collection of relevant data during the teaching and learning process. How do we know they're learning? By using the instruments mentioned before to collect evidence. We say they're learning if students can explain in their own words, give an example, ask questions, teach others, solve a problem, analyze critically, create, experiment, establish, relate, transfer to real-life situations, and make their learning and thinking visible. Here is a set of examples that have to do with the collection of evidence of comprehension and application on the topic of environmental pollution. Some of them are define, find synonyms, present an example, represent the concept with a graph or drawing, identify symbols that represent the concept, write a brief text that includes 3 terms related to the topic, or use the concept in a short text to illustrate its meaning. Assessment is a two-way communication. In traditional evaluation models, students complete a task, the teacher assesses, informs the result. But when students and teachers engage in a dialogue to discuss work, express ideas, visualize their misconceptions, and justify what they've done and why, this allows for metacognitive practice that lets teachers and students know where they are and how to shorten the gap between that point and their goal, which should be very clear from the beginning of the process. It's fundamental that these conversations refer to the task, not the person. Attacking or complimenting students is useless for the improvement of learning. Feedback is all about giving them a chance to identify problems and develop self-regulation tools and strategies. A very useful tool you might be familiar with is the ladder of feedback, which is an approach to assessing for understanding that seeks to establish a culture of trust and constructive support. When providing feedback, it suggests to follow this sequence. Clarify through the asking of questions or the stating of assumptions before offering feedback. Value. If you see something in the work that is particularly impressive, innovative, or strong, say it. It builds a supportive culture of understanding to help others see their own strengths and to also see what parts of the work should be preserved after improvement. Expressing appreciation for the other person's ideas and emphasizing positive aspects sets a supportive tone for the next step of the ladder, that is to offer concerns and issues. If you detect potential problems or challenges within the work or disagree with some ideas, share your concerns in a non-threatening way as honest thoughts. Suggest. It's valuable to connect our concerns with suggestions that students can use constructively to improve their work and use as positive feedback. And to sum up, assessment is an integral part of the teaching-learning process. It should be planned at the beginning of instruction and be used formatively to make our students' learning experiences more personal, authentic, and relevant. It should inform instruction to improve the quality of our lessons and the pertinence of what we are teaching. It's not a question of obliterating summative assessment from the equation, but to combine it with other tools to make the whole evaluation process more fruitful and complete. Thank you.